All right, so another season ended due to poor decisions that were made on Harbaugh's watch. And again, we have to sit here. We're back at square one again, and we have to sit here and ask, will Steve Bisciotti and EDC finally take a stand or finally make a stand and fire John Harbaugh? And again, this is a part two to my reaction to us losing, us inexplicably losing that AFC Championship game. I took a couple days to sit back, try to calm down. I'm mostly calmer now, but still, I have certain views on the whole situation. And again, we're right back at square one, where in the end, we all know that they need to fire John Harbaugh. Now, there are a growing number of fans who want John Harbaugh fired, but there's still many people who are pro John Harbaugh who still think we should keep him. And the main reason they think we should keep him is they're asking, hey, why would we get rid of him? You know, what sense does it make to get rid of him? This is what people are asking. And I think this is a big problem because you have a lot of people who want to keep Harbaugh strictly because they're scared of the unknown. You know, in life, you have a lot of people who they would rather stick with a familiar misery than take a risk for the sake of finding unfamiliar happiness. Because there's no logical reason to still want to keep Harbaugh at this point. The only thing people point to is they say, oh, we're winning all these games. We're winning all these games. We're winning all these games because of Lamar Jackson. Last year and the year before that, when Lamar got hurt, we saw what this team was without Lamar Jackson. And Harbaugh could not coach this team into wins. During that stretch over those, last year and the year before, our record in those games without Lamar is like 2-10. And you can't give me the excuse of, well, that's not fair. His QB was out. Kevin Stefanski essentially has no quarterback in Cleveland right now. They've thrown in like 4 different quarterbacks this year, and they have still managed to run that offense. And none of those 4 quarterbacks were particularly good this year. I know Joe Flacco got a lot of hype, but Joe Flacco wasn't playing lights out this year. But it didn't matter. We seen that with several teams. We seen when Dak Prescott got hurt on the Cowboys, Mike McCarthy was still able to consistently win games with their backup. In Cincinnati, when Joe Burrow went out and they brought in Jake Brown, and they still were able to readjust and win games that they shouldn't have won. But in the case of Harbaugh, when Lamar goes out, the team collapses. That's not a coincidence. It's because in the end, Lamar Jackson is the secret. He is the key to all of this. It's not the coaches. It is John Harbaugh. I mean, excuse me, not Harbaugh, my bad. It is Lamar Jackson. It's not John Harbaugh. He doesn't specialize in offense or defense. His background is special teams. And this is a day and age where being a head coach, it is more important than ever to be a head coach who specializes in offense or defense, preferably offense. But even if you are a defensive guy, still, that's most of the coaches that are left. Their claim to fame is they were supposedly a specialist on one of those 2 sides of the ball. Harbaugh, despite not having a strong reputation on either sides of the ball, either offense or defense, he's still being looked at as if he's some sort of specialist in any area that matters. Man, it's 2024. Special teams barely exist in the NFL anymore. Are we really going to pretend like a special teams coach really makes a major difference on this team? Are we? Like, come on, man. Look, I'm not saying that Harbaugh doesn't know anything about football. Obviously, he knows something about football. Like, he grew up around football. His father, Jack Harbaugh, has a history in football. His brother Jim was a QB. He was from the Andy Reid coaching staff. He was originally a running back coach and a DB coach before he became known as a special team specialist. But again, at the end of the day, he's never had a reputation for specializing on the two sides of the ball that actually matter. It is 2024. Nobody cares about special teams anymore, for the most part. Every now and then you see a cool special teams play, but for the most part, it's a non-factor. And it's interesting to me that whenever people like myself bring up firing Harbaugh, you have a lot of people that push back on it, and they say that it's crazy to even suggest that. And when you say, hey, man, without Lamar, he can't win. And in these playoff games, we keep running into the same hiccups. Everybody just shrugs the people that are pro Harbaugh, they just shrug their shoulders and say, well, it's not his fault because this happened and that happened. And I'm like, if it's not his fault, whose fault is it? Is he or is he not supposed to be the head person in charge? This is all happening under his watch. And it keeps repeating. The same cycle keeps repeating regardless of who's the offensive coordinator and regardless of who's the quarterback. Did y'all forget last year? Lamar Jackson wasn't in that playoff game against the Bengals. That was Tyler Huntley. And we had the same problem. We didn't let our running backs run the ball. So much so that after the game, J.K. Dobbins was complaining to the media, frustrated, asking, why didn't they give me the ball? We were on the 2-yard line, and instead of giving it to one of our running backs to get 2 yards, because we're supposed to be a running team, right? Instead of doing the common sense thing, Harbaugh and this coaching staff decided they instead wanted to have Tyler Huntley do a QB sneak from the 2-yard line. And the rest is history. Obviously, we lost. Y'all know what happened in 2019. We abandoned the run in that game too. Even in 2020, in the divisional round, and even in the wild card round. Outside of that Lamar run that won us the game, we weren't like running down the Titans' throat. But whenever we have these blunders, Harbaugh never takes accountability for it, and he never has an answer. His response is always something in the range of, well, that's just the way the game went. That's just how it played out every single time. What sense does it make to keep him around when, again, he doesn't specialize in anything, and when things go wrong for something that clearly is something he wants to happen, he doesn't take accountability for it? I know y'all heard Hollywood Brown's interview with those TikTok guys a few weeks ago or a few months ago. And in Hollywood's own words, he said himself that more so than Greg Roman, it was really Harbaugh that was the problem. In reality, Harbaugh was the one who's making these coordinators answer to him and readjust whatever they want to do around his philosophy and his game plan. It's already come out that these coordinators, they have to run their game plan by Harbaugh. But yet when things go left, we're not supposed to hold him accountable. It's not like he's one of these coaches that's trying to be hands-free and let these coordinators fully cook. It's like, no, like, especially on offense, for us to run into the same hiccup, whether it's Greg Roman or Todd Monken, for us to run into the same hiccups, whether it's Lamar Jackson or Tyler Huntley or whoever else at quarterback. Clearly, Harbaugh is the one who in these situations wants to do it, who wants to take these game plans. The game plan they chose was absurd. And you still have Ravens fans who are trying to convince themselves that Harbaugh shouldn't take accountability because, the players didn't execute. It don't matter if the players didn't execute. You're facing the worst running defense in football. Why are you not trying to run it down their throats? Why does John Harbaugh hate Gus Edwards? I want to know. That was the title of one of my videos a couple months ago. I still want to know. Why does John Harbaugh hate Gus Edwards? If you don't think he's that good, okay, fine. I never said that he was a top tier running back. My point about Gus, whenever I talk about him, is hey, he is a solid, consistent guy for us who he's good at what he's good at. He knows his lane. He sticks to his lane. He's a power back. He's best when he goes up the middle. He's hard to bring down. We know what Gus is good at. In situations in the game where it was 3rd and 1 and 4th and 1, we got Justice Hill out there instead of Gus. And I like Justice. Look, I like Justice. Justice definitely redeemed himself this year. I was very nervous with his fumbles. He finished the year strong. But guess what, man? There were many situations where it made sense to just give it to Gus. Even if it wasn't initially working, do it again and again. More often than not, if you keep giving it to Gus, regardless of if y'all think Gus is a special running back or not, if you just send him up the middle, he is 240 pounds and hard to bring down. He will get 4 yards. And if you don't like Gus, okay, fine. If you really do think Gus is just that bad and you can't trust him, even though you've never given him a chance in the playoffs to lose your trust in the first place, but if you just really think he's that bad, okay, fine. Then trade him then. Just finally trade him. Having him there, hyping him up, selling the idea to everybody that you just so heavily believe in these guys just to turn around and give Gus the ball 3 times? What sense does that make? Again, this all happened on Harbaugh's watch, but you talk to some of these fans, they act as if he's not supposed to be held accountable. You want to know one of the reasons why I like Dan Campbell, the Lions head coach, Dan Campbell, why I like him? Besides, how passionate he seems and just how likable in general he kind of seems, he is someone taking accountability. Nobody's looking at the Lions right now after that NFC Championship loss and putting it on anybody else except Dan Campbell. They're looking at Dan and they're saying, man, Dan, he kept going for it on 4th down. Why did he kick the field goals? They were holding him accountable, which is something very rare that you see in the NFL, unfortunately. Most head coaches are not held accountable. They're not held accountable, excuse me. Like, they're not. The only coaches in football that are held accountable are Robert Saleh, Brandon Staley when he was coaching the Chargers, Mike McCarthy. That's about it, pretty much. Like, nobody else, everybody else kind of slides under the radar. I guess you could throw Dan Campbell in now, but everybody else kind of slides under the radar. And nobody slides harder than John Harbaugh. He slides completely under the radar. He flies completely under the radar. You have like half of the Ravens flock act as if it's a sin to suggest that he loses his job. What sense does that make? If he's already shown you he could only get you so far, why is it even a conversation? Just let him go. Just because somebody stuck around for a long time and you just so happen to win a decent amount of games doesn't mean you should keep sticking around. Andy Reid is a much better coach than John Harbaugh ever was. But even the Eagles eventually got rid of Andy Reid. As a matter of fact, the Eagles are actually a very fascinating team. A very fascinating team, fan base, and media, like a media market when it comes to Philadelphia. If you've ever been to Philly, like it's all fascinating. They have zero patience. Now that can backfire too, but it's also fascinating because sometimes you need to have that attitude. I mean, look, man, Doug Peterson just won the Super Bowl for the Eagles in 2018, and more or less 2 years later, he lost his job. Nick Sirianni just took the Eagles to the Super Bowl a year ago. And because of how this season has played out, half of their fans, along with the Philly media, has already called for his job. They want him fired already. But yet Ravens fans, we're one of these fan bases where we have this silly ass idea that we should just stick with him because he's been here for a long time. That doesn't make sense. Would you rather get rid of them too early or too late? I guess is the real question to ask, right? This is the real question to ask. Would you rather keep Harbaugh for way too long, or would you rather get rid of him right now while it's still early enough, right? Because when you look at a team like I'm not even going to use another team. Let's stick to the Ravens, right? Look at Greg Roman. We just went through this with Greg Roman. Greg Roman was here for 4 or 5 years or whatever. And for 3 years, you had fans who kept convincing themselves that we should keep Roman. We should stick with him. We should stick with him. We should stick with him. And the only logic they kept using was, well, nah, look at this. We're winning all these games. We're setting all these records. We're winning all these games. We're setting all these records. Lamar's winning all these games. He's winning MVPs. He's setting all these records. They were talking as if Greg Roman made Lamar, and they refused to accept the fact that no, Lamar was already going to be that dude regardless. The number one thing people kept saying all year was, before the season started, was, oh, I'm so scared. What are we going to do? How are we going to run the ball? Is Todd Monken going to run the ball? What's going to happen? What happened? We still led the league in rushing. So what does that mean? What that means is we kept Greg Roman for 2 extra years thinking that he added something that he really did not. As long as Lamar Jackson is on this team, at the bare minimum, even when Lamar starts to get slower in a couple of years, just from him getting older, we're still at the bare minimum going to be a top 8 running attack. So thinking that you need to keep a coordinator who's only good at half of his job just because we were leading the league in rushing, that makes zero sense. Just like wanting to keep Harbaugh just because we're winning a lot of games makes zero sense, because we're not winning the games because of him. So I'm going to go back to the question I asked a few minutes ago. Would you rather wait till it's too early or too late? Because it's not too early to fire Harbaugh. It's already too late, honestly. But I mean late. Do you want to wait till the media starts to pick up on the fact that Harbaugh needs to be fired? Do you know how sad it was when the media finally started to catch on that Greg Roman needs to be kicked out of the Ravens? The media is typically very slow to catch on to all this stuff. By the time they start mentioning it, it's usually too late. It's usually been happening for way too long. They're not on the cutting edge of what's happening to different teams like that. They're not following this team as closely as we are. But guess what? At a certain point, they're going to start to put 2 and 2 together, just like they did with Greg Roman. Do you want to really let it get to that point where it finally becomes a talking point nationally that, hey, maybe the Ravens should move on from John Harbaugh? Look at the Patriots. The Patriots should have been moved on from Bill Belichick. But they didn't want to, right? Because, number one, a lot of people thought that Belichick was more vital to their winning than Brady was. Clearly, that wasn't the case. And number two, they were too caught up on the fact that they won a lot of games with him as the coach in the past, and not wanting to accept that, look, he's taking you as far as he's going to take you. They kept waiting, and fans kept waiting, and everybody kept waiting. And now, look, we are 4 or 5 years down the line, and the Patriots are embarrassingly bad. And finally, they have moved on and are starting a new chapter. Do you really want to wait that long? The Ravens equivalent of that would be if we waited till Lamar was no longer in his prime to finally say, okay, well, let's get another coach. Like, do you know how sad it would be if we did that? Like, come on, man. Cam Newton, a couple months ago, a lot of people who lack comprehension skills, they got mad at him because he made a statement about game-changing players versus game managers at quarterback. Now, again, Cam was not trying to diss any quarterback. He was simply making the point that there were levels to quarterbacks. The same thing applies to coaches. John Harbaugh is not a game-changing coach. He's not a game-changing coordinator. He's more of a game-managing coach. You could take him out, plug somebody else in, and still replicate the success. You want to know who's like a game-changing coach? Sean McVay. You want to know who's going to be a game-changing coach most likely? Mike McDonald, the guy on our team right now who, at least for the time being, is a defensive coordinator who we are at risk of losing because he's interviewing to go to other teams. We could promote him right now. We could promote him right now and start to just restructure how this is going to go. And maybe we keep Todd Monken, or maybe we find somebody better. But either way, moving on from Harbaugh is necessary. Like I said, Harbaugh is a game managing coach, which isn't a bad thing, but he's not this special coach who's once in a lifetime, who's hard to replace. He's just a glorified cheerleader. It is what it is. I want us to make this decision sooner than later because I don't want us to end up in the category of teams like the Cowboys and the Bills and the Steelers. Those teams are in a similar dilemma right now. More so the Bills and the Cowboys. I'm not going to mention the Steelers just yet. I just want to make the point that when you look at teams like the Bills, right, they have their generational quarterback in Josh Allen. Even though, again, Josh Allen, nowhere near as good as Lamar. Argue with the wall. I'm not going back and forth with you. But still, Josh Allen, for better or for worse, when it comes to his turnovers, he's still a very good quarterback, right? It's clear as day that they should move on from Sean McDermott. But ultimately, they're not going to do it. And now, just like the Ravens are in a similar spot where we've both been with this coach for over 5 years, this QB and coach combination. And we are still, we haven't reached the mountaintop we thought we would reach, or that we almost reached. And instead of moving on from this coach and trying to reset everything, because this coach might have taken us as far as he possibly can, we're holding on to him for dear life for no good reason. The Steelers are in a similar place, and so are the Cowboys. Now, the Cowboys, McCarthy and Dak, I think they've only been together like 3 years, but still, similar scenario. Again, Dak's not as good either. He's another tier below that, but still, similar scenario. You got your quarterback and the coach. You're going kind of far, but not really. It's time. You really should take a risk and move on, but they've already made it clear that they don't want to. And yes, continuity matters, but there's no guarantees at that point. You're playing it too safe, but it's just sad to see. As far as the Steelers example that I was referencing a second ago, even though the Steelers don't have their quarterback of the future right now, they're in a similar place to the Ravens where it's like, all right, you have this long tenured coach who's been here for almost 20 years. And it's clear as day, he's taken you as far as he's going to take you. And instead of just taking the risk of moving on from him, you're doubling down on trying to stay with him, hoping that you could figure something else out. When all you're doing is just delaying the inevitable, which is another disappointing season. But if you're the Steelers, you shouldn't really care that much, right? Because you don't have a once in a generation player whose prime is being squandered. As Ravens fans, we should absolutely care a lot more because we're literally sitting here with a once in a generation quarterback whose prime is being squandered because we keep making the same mistakes in the most important moments because of John Harbaugh's decision, because of his philosophy, because of his coaching staff. We keep running into the same walls. But a lot of people, they're not going to see it that way. And as much as I went on and on in this interview, in this podcast slash rant or whatever, and if you're still listening this long, thank you, I appreciate it. But I know there's a strong chance they're still gonna probably bring Harbaugh back, unfortunately. And part of the reason why is, look, I just saw a video, right, from from one of these like YouTubers who does a lot of like film study stuff around the NFL, right? He brought up an interesting point when it comes to our decision in the AFC Championship to not run the ball. Not only did he kind of go over the running plays and show how the running backs really didn't get it going, but also he brought up a stat that's really hard to deny, which is, hey, during the first 3 quarters of the game when they were trying to run the ball, the drives kept stalling out. The ball wasn't moving. Nothing was working. We only averaged 19 yards per drive, and we ended up punting a lot compared to when we started throwing the ball more towards the end of the game. We went from only averaging 19 yards per drive to averaging 49 yards per drive. So of course, when you bring that up from that perspective, especially when you think about the fact that, hey, we were one Zay Flowers fumble away from tying the game, yeah, that does bring a different angle to it. And of course, if we do end up keeping Harbaugh, I'm sure this will be the angle that Steve Bisciotti and Eric DeCosta end up looking at it from. I just wish they would be willing to look past that and actually realize that even if the run isn't working, if this is truly your identity, you should stick with it anyway. The Chiefs don't have a running identity, and their running back, Isaiah Pacheco, is mid. But still, Isaiah Pacheco ran the ball 24 times, and he only averaged 2.8 yards a carry. So clearly, even if it wasn't working that well, they still were willing to keep going back over and over again. That's supposed to be our job because we're supposed to be the team with the running identity. As far as another way to look at it when it comes to why I think Harbaugh should be fired, for the average person who might hear this or who doesn't really understand why I think you should get rid of Harbaugh, imagine working at a job where you have a manager overseeing it who he or she's an okay worker. Like they're okay, but they've already gotten all the awards, the regional awards for getting the most sales or this or that. They got it years ago, so since then they've been coasting. They really don't care that much. They let their other assistant manager over here, they're doing drugs. They let the other assistant manager over there, they're hooking up and running trains on each other in the freaking break room. And all this nonsense is going on. And the only reason this manager is able to coast with this nonsense that's low-key happening in plain sight is because you have 2 or 3 people in that office who are really good workers and are single-handed, not single-handedly, but these 3 people by themselves are the ones that are actually carrying this team and putting them in a position to win. And because people who either work in that office but they like that manager, or don't work in that office at all. They're just looking from the outside looking in. They're all seeing that the office is still ranking somewhat high when it's time to look at how they're performing in sales compared to every other office in the region. You have people that'll say, "Well, why would you want to fire him? Why would you want to fire John?" But they don't realize, hey, we've managed to stay afloat with John, but he's only taken us so far. He's been coasting. He's not trying. He's not as hungry as a young coach trying to prove themselves and get a ring is. And all his decisions prove that because he keeps trying to play it safe. No, excuse me. He keeps trying to he keeps trying to play it safe. Because they don't believe in Gus Edwards, they think it's safer to just not give him the ball. So I don't know if anybody followed the metaphor I just gave, but if you did, I appreciate it. And let me know. Do you think we should fire Harbaugh? And if you disagree, tell me first, before you even tell me why you disagree. Tell me, how did this loss on Sunday make you feel? Before you even bother to tell me that you don't think we should fire Harbaugh, tell me, how did this loss make you feel? Because in case you forgot, this is the fourth loss we've had in 4 or 5 years of this nature, regardless of who was that quarterback or offensive coordinator.